Picture this. You've just pulled into your brand new driveway, the car engine is still humming, and the ink on your closing documents isn't even dry yet. You're sitting there with that goofy, ear-to-ear grin that only comes from years of scrimping, saving, and convincing yourself that skipping Starbucks for a decade is totally worth it because now, finally, you've got a place with your name on the deed. It's the moment every homeowner dreams about. The sigh of relief after months of stress, inspections, appraisals, and endless paperwork. It should have been a champagne-popping, Instagram-boasting kind of day. But no, not for Ethan. Because instead of hearing chirping birds or the gentle sprinkler rhythm of suburbia, his welcome soundtrack was a shrill voice cutting across the street like an air raid siren. "You can't live here!" Yes, ladies and gentlemen, before he could even step out of his car, before the new home smell had settled in, Ethan got his first introduction to the nightmare neighbor known as Valerie Shaw, a.k.a. the reigning HOA Karen of Maple Ridge. And she didn't just stroll over politely. Oh, no. She sprinted like an NFL referee charging to throw a flag. She wasn't bringing a casserole. She wasn't bringing a welcome to the neighborhood card. She was bringing accusations, finger pointing, and the kind of entitlement that could power a small city's grid if someone figured out how to harness it. Let's pause here and appreciate the irony. Ethan literally had the key fob still warm in his hand, the thing that symbolizes, yes, I bought this house legally, thank you very much, and yet within seconds, he was being treated like a trespasser who had just crawled through a window with a ski mask and a crowbar. Valerie planted herself at his bumper and jabbed a finger at him like she was about to make a citizen's arrest. This wasn't a chatty introduction. This was the equivalent of a full-on turf war declaration. Ethan, trying to keep things civil, because, that's what normal humans do when first meeting a neighbor, rolled down the window and said lightly, "Ma'am, I literally closed an hour ago." Simple, direct, polite. But Valerie, eyes wild like she had downed 3 Red Bulls, shot back, "Not on that house. That house belongs to my family. You've made a mistake. Leave before this gets ugly." Excuse me? What? Let's break that down. She claimed the house he just legally purchased belonged to her family. That's like me walking into your kitchen while you're eating dinner and saying, "Oh, that lasagna? Yeah, that belongs to me. Hand it over." Except instead of pasta, it's someone's entire 6-figure investment in a 2-story dream home shaded by gorgeous old maple trees. And speaking of trees, Ethan and his wife Lena had been chasing a house for months, outbid over and over again by smug cash buyers, waiving their inspections like they were allergic to responsibilities. So when this house popped up under market price, they jumped. They didn't ask why it felt like a bargain tag. They told themselves maybe it was just luck. Spoiler, it wasn't luck. It was the calm before Hurricane Valerie. Now here's where it gets spicy. Ethan had receipts, literal receipts. He wasn't just some naive rookie. He had county maps, highlighted parcel lines, and all the boring paperwork that makes homeowners sleep soundly at night. But Valerie didn't care about paperwork. She cared about power. She declared loud and proud that the house was part of her HOA, Maple Ridge Community Association, and as acting president, she was ordering him to vacate while they sorted out the fraud. Acting president? Lady, this isn't the Oval Office. Nobody salutes when you wave a clipboard. Ethan, trying to still be the bigger man, pulled out the glowing neon evidence showing the parcel was never annexed into the HOA. It predated their rules by 15 years. Translation, Valerie had 0 authority over him. Zilch. Nada. She stared at that paperwork like it was written in hieroglyphics. Then she uttered the most Karen sentence in history. "Maps can be wrong." I mean, really? What's next? Gravity can be wrong? Taxes can be optional? Within minutes, Valerie was on the phone summoning her HOA board members like she was calling in backup for a hostage negotiation. Cars pulled up, polo shirts and clipboards spilled out, and suddenly Ethan was facing a full HOA quorum on his lawn. Luckily, one older guy actually had a conscience. He checked the deed, cross-referenced the binder, and cleared his throat before declaring, he's in the right. This parcel was never incorporated. Boom. Case closed, right? Wrong. Because if you know anything about HOA Karens, it's that facts don't end fights, they just escalate them. Valerie gave Ethan a tight, threatening smile and said, "We'll see." And it didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like a war declaration wrapped in fake politeness. And so, Ethan's new homeowner dream, meant to be filled with fresh paint, comfy couches, and late-night pizza unpacking, turned into the opening scene of what can only be described as the HOA Hunger Games. And if you thought a woman yelling, "You can't live here" on day one was the peak of this saga, oh, buddy, think again, because Valerie wasn't just loud, she was strategic. Welcome to Fact 2, where HOA Karen upgrades from verbal warfare to weaponized bureaucracy. So, you'd think after being publicly embarrassed by her own HOA board, Valerie might have taken the L, baked a banana bread, and tried to win Ethan over with passive-aggressive small talk like, "Cute shutters, too bad they're not regulation." But no, Valerie doesn't do retreat. She does reinvention. If brute force and finger jabbing didn't work, she had a plan B. And trust me, it was nastier. She went full bureaucratic assassin. Here's how it started. Imagine Ethan finally beginning to unpack boxes, maybe assembling an IKEA couch while wondering why there are always leftover screws, when a bright pink slip arrives in the mail. Not a welcome to the neighborhood card, not a coupon booklet for local pizza joints. Nope, it's a notice from city code enforcement. The violation? Improper trash container placement. That's right, Ethan apparently was now a menace to society because his garbage can wasn't sitting at the perfect HOA-approved angle. And it didn't stop there. The following week, another violation, this time unapproved exterior color. Which would be hilarious, except Ethan hadn't painted a single thing. The house was the same beige-on-beige masterpiece it had been since the Clinton administration. Then came the kicker, an untidy lawn violation, which was particularly insulting considering Ethan and Leanna had been watering the grass like it was a dying ICU patient and trimming the edges so neatly you could measure them with a ruler. That's when the light bulb flicked on. Valerie wasn't just being petty. She was weaponizing bureaucracy. She knew that by burying Ethan in paper cuts disguised as official notices, she could drain his energy, his wallet, and maybe even his will to stay. This wasn't about grass height. This was psychological warfare conducted via municipal stationery. Now, let's be clear. Valerie had no actual authority over Ethan's property. His house wasn't part of her HOA. But here's the evil genius of it. She didn't need authority. All she needed was persistence. You know the saying, "The pen is mightier than the sword"? Valerie took that to heart. Except her pen was filing complaints at dawn, harassing city inspectors, and using rules like a personal arsenal. Ethan, bless his optimistic soul, tried the direct route. He called City Hall, sat through the endless phone tree. You know, press 1 if you enjoy wasting your entire afternoon. Press 2 if you'd like to hear hold music from 1993. Eventually, he got a human being on the line. And what did they say? "Oh, new owner. Yeah, that makes sense. Best advice? Appeal. Bring evidence. And keep records." Translation: buddy, you've just stepped into the HOA Thunderdome. Good luck, and don't forget to file in triplicate. So Ethan did what any tech-savvy IT guy would do. He turned into the Batman of documentation. Cameras on archiving mode, binders thicker than a college textbook, tabs, labels, color codes, you name it. While most new homeowners are busy choosing throw pillows, Ethan was building a litigation fortress in his living room. And it paid off. The cameras caught Valerie creeping around at ungodly hours, measuring the distance between her trash can and the porch railing like she was some kind of deranged surveyor. They filmed her peeking through side gates, snapping photos of his yard like she was auditioning for CSI Suburbs. She even trained other neighbors to document violations while birds chirped innocently in the background. If this had been a reality TV show, it would have been titled Karen, Neighborhood Stalker Edition. But here's where the story tilts from annoying to terrifying, because Valerie's campaign wasn't just about letters and lawn wet pics. She wanted to bleed Ethan dry, socially, emotionally, and financially. And she knew just how to escalate. Remember, this wasn't Valerie's first rodeo. According to whispers and later some cold hard evidence, she had already pushed out multiple families using the exact same playbook. Trash violation, lawn violation, paint violation. Repeat. Death by 1,000 paper cuts until desperate homeowners sold their houses for less than market value just to escape. Think about how insidious that is. You move into your dream home, and suddenly, instead of barbecues and block parties, your weekends are spent appealing citations and taking screenshots. Your neighbors start looking at you sideways because Karen's been whispering poison about your non-compliance, and before you know it, the dream has rotted into a nightmare. Valerie was basically running a suburban racket, extortion by clipboard. And poor Ethan hadn't even finished unpacking his silverware before realizing he'd been cast as the unwilling star of her favorite production, the HOA Showdown. Here's the punchline, though. While Valerie thought she was tightening the noose, she was actually creating her own paper trail. Every complaint, every violation, every creepy dawn patrol, it was all stacking up against her, brick by brick, in Ethan's meticulously labeled binder. She thought she was burying him in paperwork, but really, she was digging her own grave in carbon copy triplicate. And just when you think, okay, this is bad, but at least it's staying between neighbors, Valerie pulls the dirtiest trick yet. She takes the war to Ethan's workplace. That's right, welcome to Fact 3, where HOA Karen weaponizes HR. At this point, Ethan probably thought things couldn't get worse. I mean, sure, Valerie had already stormed his driveway like a referee gone rogue, filed enough bogus complaints to qualify as a one-woman department of red tape, and turned the concept of neighborhood watch into neighborhood stalk. But hey, at least all the drama was confined to his block, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Because Valerie had one more level to her HOA boss battle. She was about to drag Ethan's professional life into the mud. Let's set the scene. Ethan's in his home office, probably wearing pajama pants and a button-up shirt because Zoom meetings are the modern mullet, business on top, sweatpants below. He's sipping coffee, maybe even feeling proud of himself for catching Valerie on camera during her latest 6 a.m. trash can measuring escapade. For a split second, life feels manageable. Then, his boss pings him. You know the kind of ping that doesn't just ping, it pings with vibes. The careful, cautious tone in the message. The dreaded, hey, do you have a minute for a quick call? That phrase is corporate speak for, brace yourself, your day is about to implode. Ethan hops on, and his boss clears his throat like he's about to deliver bad news about budget cuts. So, someone reached out to the office. They had concerns about your disruptive behavior in the neighborhood and, well, how that might affect our company's reputation with local clients. Cue the record scratch. Disruptive? Ethan? The same guy whose biggest crime so far was buying a house that wasn't in an HOA and daring to put his trash can a few inches off the invisible Karen line? Suddenly, thanks to Valerie, he's being painted as the neighborhood menace, and not just to nosy neighbors, but to his employer. Let's appreciate the pettiness here. Valerie wasn't content with sending city inspectors. She wasn't satisfied with harassing Ethan in person. She decided to reach through the fourth wall of HOA drama and yank on his paycheck. Because nothing says community spirit like trying to get your neighbor fired for existing. Now, thankfully, Ethan wasn't some corporate newbie with zero receipts. He had his binder of doom, his mountain of documentation, and a security system that basically doubled as a suburban reality TV studio. When his boss cautiously asked, what's going on over there? Ethan didn't stammer or panic. He calmly flipped open the binder on camera like it was a holy text. Tab after tab of photos, time-stamped videos, violation letters, all pointing to the obvious truth. Valerie was less a concerned neighbor and more a full-time chaos consultant. And you know what? His boss believed him. He actually said something like, "Okay, yeah, this tracks," which is good news, right? But here's the kicker. That call changed everything for Ethan, because it meant that Valerie wasn't just trying to annoy him, she was trying to dismantle him, piece by piece. Home life, sanity, reputation, career. If she could touch it, she'd try to ruin it. And let's be honest, that's when it stopped being funny. At first, you could laugh about the measuring tape shenanigans. You could roll your eyes at the fake lawn violations. But when someone messes with your job, that's crossing into DEFCON 1 territory. That's when Ethan knew this wasn't neighbor drama. It was all-out war. Here's the clever twist, though. Valerie's move backfired. By dragging Ethan's job into it, she accidentally validated his paranoia. She confirmed this wasn't about a setback or a paint color. It was a campaign, a pattern, a playbook she probably used before on other unsuspecting families. And that meant Ethan wasn't just reacting anymore. He was strategizing. He was gearing up for a fight. Think about how devious this all is. Most people, faced with the threat of losing their income, would fold. They'd sell the house, pack up, and run. Valerie knew that. That was her endgame, break people until they couldn't afford to resist. And honestly, in a lot of cases, it probably worked. But Ethan, he wasn't about to be another statistic in Valerie's scrapbook of victims. So instead of shrinking, he doubled down. He beefed up his surveillance, organized his evidence, and sharpened his resolve. If Valerie thought dragging HR into it would end the story, she was dead wrong. What she really did was trigger the plot twist that turned Ethan from passive victim to active warrior. Because now, it wasn't just about keeping his home, it was about proving a point, about exposing Valerie's whole rotten empire of weaponized rules and bogus complaints, about showing that sometimes the best way to beat a Karen is to out-document, out-persist, and outlast her. But here's the thing. About war, it's never fought alone. Just when Ethan was starting to wonder how deep this rabbit hole went, a mysterious ally appeared. Not in person, but in the form of cryptic text messages. That's right, grab your popcorn because Fact 4 introduces the ghost texter.
Just when Ethan thought the HOA chaos couldn't get more bizarre. Because really, how do you top "my neighbor tried to get me fired for having a trash can"? His phone buzzed with something straight out of a thriller movie. A text. No name, no introduction, just a cryptic message. Don't trust anything Valerie tells you about that house. Document everything. She's dangerous. Excuse me? This wasn't a concerned neighbor dropping off banana bread and whispering, "Watch out for Karen." This was anonymous, late-night, goosebumps on your arms kind of stuff. It felt less like suburban small talk and more like Ethan had accidentally stumbled into a conspiracy novel. Now, Ethan was an IT guy by trade. He was the type to give lectures at work about never clicking shady links or answering emails from Nigerian princes. And here he was, staring at a mystery text like it was the Dead Sea Scrolls, rereading it 10 times and treating it like gospel. That's how unsettling it felt. And here's the thing. The text wasn't wrong. By now, Valerie had proven herself to be the HOA equivalent of a Bond villain. Minus the tuxedos and exotic layers, but with an endless supply of clipboards and weaponized city ordinances. Ethan was already documenting, already filming, already filing everything into binders with the obsessive precision of someone who realized that the only way to survive in this cul-de-sac war zone was to turn into the Sherlock Holmes of suburbia. But the text raised bigger questions. Who was this mysterious ally? How did they know so much about Valerie? And why were they warning Ethan, of all people? It was like being in a horror movie where the phone rings and a distorted voice says, "I know what she's planning." Except instead of running out of the house like any sane person, Ethan leaned in. As the days rolled on, the mystery texter became something like a ghostly guardian angel. Their messages came sporadically, but always with eerie accuracy. "She's done this before. 3 families in 2 years. Same pattern. Another warned, she'll escalate, harass, isolate, force a sale. These weren't just hunches. They were details, almost too precise to be rumor. Imagine what that does to your brain. You're already stressed, exhausted, and living with the constant dread that your neighbor is plotting your downfall. Now add a faceless, nameless stranger feeding you insider intel. On one hand, relief. You're not crazy. On the other, panic. Someone out there knows the script before it happens, and they're watching closely enough to text play-by-play commentary. This is the part of the story where Ethan stopped thinking of Valerie as annoying neighbor and started realizing she was running a full-blown operation. She wasn't just making life inconvenient. She was following a playbook, one that ended with families selling their homes for tens of thousands below market value. And suddenly, Ethan could see the pattern. All those suspiciously underpriced sales on Zillow, all those motivated sellers who seemed to vanish quietly in the night. Valerie had turned harassment into a business model. And here's the kicker. The text messages didn't just warn Ethan, they hardened his resolve. Because knowing she'd done this to others meant it wasn't just about him anymore. He wasn't the first victim, and if he didn't push back, he wouldn't be the last. Valerie wasn't defending community standards. She was running a suburban shakedown disguised as civic duty. But of course, Ethan's brain also went to the dark place. Who was this mysterious texter? A neighbor too scared to speak up publicly? A former victim keeping tabs? Or, plot twist, someone on Valerie's own team feeding him crumbs for unknown reasons? After all, anonymous allies are only comforting in movies. In real life, they make you sleep with one eye open. Still, the advice was golden. Document everything. Keep receipts. Build a case. Because if Valerie had a plan to crush him, Ethan now had one to fight back. And he had help, even if it came in the form of cryptic texts from a faceless stranger. And honestly, there was something deliciously ironic about it. Valerie, the queen of weaponized bureaucracy, loved to operate in the shadows, slipping complaint letters into city files, whispering accusations into neighbors' ears, dialing Ethan's boss behind his back. But now she had a shadow following her. Someone was watching the watcher. And that anonymous texter was feeding Ethan just enough breadcrumbs to flip the script. So while Valerie thought she was isolating Ethan, what she was really doing was uniting him with a secret ally who knew her playbook inside and out. And that shift, tiny as it seemed, was the first crack in her armor. But who was this mystery texter really? And more importantly, what was Valerie's endgame? Because trust me, this wasn't about grass height or trash bins. It was about money. Big money. Enter Fact 5, where we expose the Redwood Preservation Trust, Valerie's real puppet master.
Up to this point, Valerie looked like your typical power-drunk HOA president, obsessed with trash cans, addicted to clipboards, and armed with more rules than common sense. But here's the twist. Her tantrums weren't just about personal control. No, this wasn't about neighborhood pride or civic duty. This was about money. Cold, hard cash. Enter the mysterious, oh-so-official-sounding Redwood Preservation Trust. Sounds wholesome, right? The kind of organization you'd expect to sponsor tree planting events or hand out tote bags at a farmer's market. Preservation has a nice, eco-friendly ring to it. Makes you think of baby owls, clean streams, and wholesome retirees in gardening gloves. But no. This trust wasn't about protecting nature, it was about protecting profit. And Valerie was smack in the middle of it. Here's how Ethan discovered it. Fueled by too much caffeine and sheer survival instinct, he dove headfirst into public records. The kind of deep dive most people only do when stalking an ex on social media. Except instead of relationship drama, Ethan was uncovering real estate corruption. And what he found was chilling. The Redwood Preservation Trust had its fingerprints all over the neighborhood. Families who sold their homes under mysterious pressure, deeds transferring at tens of thousands below market value, sellers who seemed to buckle after months of nonstop compliance issues, and guess who always seemed to be around before these suspicious sales? That's right, Valerie Shaw. clipboard in hand, smiling sweetly while quietly suffocating her targets with fines, complaints, and shame. Think about the scam for a second. Step 1. Valerie identifies a house. Often older owners, people going through hardship, or anyone not willing to fight tooth and nail. Step 2. She unleashes the HOA harassment machine. Trash fines, paint complaints, bogus citations, death by 1,000 paper cuts until the owners are exhausted, demoralized, and desperate. Step 3. A helpful neighbor, gee, wonder who that is, connects them with a buyer, the Redwood Preservation Trust. Step 4. The family sells under market, grateful just to escape the nightmare. Step 5. Profit. This wasn't community preservation. It was a shakedown in yoga pants. Valerie had turned enforcing standards into a revenue stream. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was hollowing it out one underpriced deed at a time. Ethan's research showed families who sold for $20,000, $40,000, even $50,000 below market value. And the timing was suspiciously consistent. First the harassment, then the sale, then silence. The trust swooped in, scooped up the property, and wrapped it in a pretty bow of preservation. Meanwhile, the sellers walked away traumatized, wallets lighter, and dignity shredded. Now, here's the kicker. Ethan wasn't the only one sniffing around. Remember those cryptic texts from the mystery ally? Yeah, those breadcrumbs led him to see the bigger picture. Valerie wasn't just a nosy neighbor with too much time on her hands. She was part of a larger, coordinated play. Her job? Be the attack dog, the face of authority, the Karen who looked like she was acting in the community's best interest, while secretly running a pipeline of desperation straight into the trust's waiting arms. And when Ethan put the pieces together, it all clicked. Valerie's obsession with his house wasn't random. His property was prime real estate, and she thought she could run the same scam she'd run before: harass, isolate, and eventually force the sale. Except Ethan wasn't built like her other victims. He wasn't sick, elderly, or financially strapped. He was stubborn, petty, and most importantly, he had receipts. Let's pause for a second and appreciate the sheer audacity of this scheme. Imagine dressing up financial exploitation as preserving neighborhood character. It's like robbing someone at gunpoint and then saying, "Relax, I'm just protecting the aesthetic of this street." And the worst part? It worked. Multiple times. Families lost homes, dignity, and equity, while Valerie got to strut around in her polo shirt, pretending she was the savior of suburban order. But Ethan, he was having none of it. The moment he saw the trust's name attached to multiple shady deals, the game changed. It wasn't just about saving his home anymore. It was about exposing the entire rotten system. And here's where things started to get truly dangerous for Valerie. Because once Ethan realized she was operating as more than just a nosy neighbor, he stopped playing defense. He wasn't just reacting to complaints or appealing citations. He was investigating, connecting the dots, building a narrative that showed Valerie wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. She was an accomplice in a predatory scheme that targeted vulnerable families. And for Valerie, Ethan wasn't just a difficult homeowner. He was a threat to the whole racket. And threats don't get ignored. They get escalated, which is exactly what happened next. So now we know Valerie wasn't just petty, she was profitable. But how do you fight someone who's playing chess when you're just trying to unpack your silverware? Simple. You bring in a lawyer, and not just any lawyer, a legal shark with a binder appetite. Welcome to fact number 6, where Ethan officially lawyers up.
By this point, Ethan had endured the HOA Karen starter pack: driveway ambush, bogus fines, workplace sabotage, and cryptic anonymous texts warning of a conspiracy bigger than his mortgage. Most people would have cracked. Most people had cracked. That was Valerie's whole business model. But Ethan wasn't most people. He was tired, angry, and caffeinated enough to make the kind of decision that turns neighborhood squabbles into full-on courtroom sagas. He called a lawyer.
And not just any lawyer. Enter Aaron Walsh, real estate attorney, sharp as a tack, with the kind of smile that said, "I've been in the trenches of property disputes and I like it there." Ethan walked into her office with his legendary binder, the one stuffed with violation letters, time-stamped photos, and enough video evidence to power a Netflix docuseries. He was nervous. After all, to a professional, his binder might have looked like the ramblings of a paranoid man driven insane by shrubbery ordinances. But Erin wasn't laughing. Oh no. She flipped through tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, her smile fading with each turn. By tab 4, the smile was gone, replaced with that lawyerly squint that says, "We've got a case." She looked up and delivered the kind of line that makes you both relieved and terrified. "Ethan, this isn't a neighbor spat. This is intentional interference with property rights and possibly civil conspiracy." Boom. Validation. For weeks, Ethan had been wondering if he was crazy, if maybe he was overreacting. But here was a lawyer, an actual legal authority, telling him, "Nope, you're not nuts. Your neighbor really is trying to orchestrate your downfall." That's the kind of relief that makes you want to cry and fist pump at the same time. So, what does a lawyer do in a case like this? First, she built a defense wall taller than Valerie's ego. Step 1, appeals. Every violation, every bogus citation, it all went into the appeal process with documentation to back it up. Step 2, harassment reports. Valerie wasn't just annoying. She was trespassing, stalking, and interfering. That crossed the line into legal territory. Step 3, a draft restraining order. Oh yes, Erin was ready to hit Valerie with the legal equivalent of a bug zapper if she stepped out of line again. And here's the thing. Valerie felt the shift. Up until now, she'd been playing with what she thought was easy prey. She was the cat, Ethan was the mouse. But suddenly, the mouse hired a hawk, and that hawk was ready to file motions, subpoena records, and turn Valerie's petty power trip into a liability. How do we know Valerie felt the change? Because instead of cooling down, she doubled down. Classic Karen move. When Ethan lawyered up, Valerie started holding secret HOA garage meetings. Yes, like an underground crime ring, but with folding chairs and printouts. Ethan's side cameras caught it all. A group of neighbors huddled around a table under a shop light, Valerie at the head like she was running a suburban mafia. She handed out schedules, coached them on how to file violations, and basically organized a full-blown surveillance squad. It wasn't community upkeep, it was choreography. Monday, check trash. Tuesday, photograph lawn. Thursday, complain about noise. But here's the delicious irony. Every new escalation only made Ethan's case stronger. Every midnight measurement, every whispered instruction, every bogus complaint, it all fed into Erin's growing arsenal. By the time they were done, Valerie had basically built Ethan's lawsuit for him. And let's not forget the emotional side of this. For Ethan, hiring Erin wasn't just about legal protection, it was about sanity. For the first time in weeks, he slept through the night. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't jumping every time his phone buzzed with another violation. There's something profoundly comforting knowing that you've got someone in your corner whose job it is to wrestle with bullies like Valerie. Of course, Valerie wasn't going down quietly. She wasn't just some overzealous rule keeper. She was a woman with a track record, a pipeline, and a financial incentive to win, which meant she wasn't just going to file more complaints. She was going to escalate in ways Ethan couldn't even predict. And thanks to Erin, when that escalation came, Ethan would be ready. Because here's the truth about bullies. They thrive when their victims feel isolated, when you think no one believes you, when you're too tired to fight back. But the second you bring backup, the second you show you're willing to go the distance, their whole strategy starts to unravel. And Valerie was about to find that out the hard way. And speaking of unraveling, Valerie's next move took things out of the cul-de-sac and straight into the courthouse. She thought she could play the victim. She thought she could flip the script. What she didn't know was that Ethan and Erin had the unedited footage ready to flip it right back. Welcome to fact number 7, the courtroom showdown.
If this HOA battle was a movie, this is the scene where the ominous music swells, the gavel bangs, and Valerie struts into the courtroom like she's about to deliver the performance of her life. Because that's exactly what she tried to do, turn a suburban squabble into a full-blown legal drama, starring herself as the fragile victim and Ethan as the scary villain. Spoiler alert, it didn't go the way she hoped. Let's rewind. After Ethan lawyered up, Valerie realized her clipboard crusade wasn't working. The fines weren't sticking, the harassment wasn't breaking him, and her secret HOA squad was basically a glorified gossip club with bad lighting. So she pulled her next power move, filing for a restraining order against Ethan. Yep, the same guy who had done nothing but document, appeal, and mow his lawn with surgical precision was suddenly being painted as the neighborhood menace. The restraining order read like a bad fan fiction. Valerie described Ethan as aggressive, confrontational, and a threat to community safety. She even included evidence, 3 neighbor statements, all suspiciously similar, like they'd been copy-pasted off the same homework assignment. And the pièce de résistance? Video clips. Except not the full footage, just carefully trimmed snippets from Ethan's own security feed. Imagine watching yourself in a video where all the context is cut out, leaving you looking like the unhinged one. That's what a Valerie brought to court. Now picture Ethan sitting there, stomach in knots, as Valerie takes the stand. She clasped her hands just so, voice trembling like she was auditioning for Victim of the Year. Her lawyer chimed in with grand speeches about community safety and disturbing behavior. And for a moment, just a moment, the room tilted in her favor. You could almost see the judge thinking, maybe this guy really is the problem. But then came Aaron. Cool, calm, and locked and loaded with the unedited receipts. She straightened her stack of papers, gave the judge a polite nod, and said, "Your Honor, we have full unedited footage to provide context to Miss Shaw's claims." And oh, what a show that was. The big screen lit up with Valerie caught red-handed, her heels stepping a full yard over Ethan's property line, her tape measure clicking against his porch railing at dawn, her whisper to a neighbor coaching them to say they felt threatened. The courtroom went from sympathetic silence to awkward disbelief. Valerie's carefully crafted victim act was unraveling like a cheap sweater. But Aaron wasn't done. Exhibit after exhibit rolled out, each one hammering another nail into Valerie's case. And then came the bombshell, Exhibit H. High-resolution photos, time-stamped, date-stamped, showing Valerie at a coffee shop sliding what sure looked like an envelope across to a uniformed code inspector. Yep, the same inspector who had been mysteriously prolific in issuing Ethan's bogus citations. The judge's eyebrows practically hit the ceiling. Valerie's lawyer leapt up with objections, but it was too late. The room's energy had flipped. Valerie wasn't the trembling victim anymore. She was looking more like the villain in a community theater production of Suburban Scandals. The judge called a recess, studied the photos and chambers, and came back with the kind of controlled fury only judges can pull off. The restraining order? Denied. With prejudice. Translation, not only was Valerie's request thrown out, but she couldn't just refile the same nonsense tomorrow. On top of that, the judge referred the matter to the district attorney for investigation into potential corruption. Oh, and Valerie got a personal warning about perjury. For Ethan, it was like gulping down a glass of cold water after weeks wandering in the desert. Validation, vindication, victory. The bailiff even muttered a quiet apology on the way out, which, let's be real, is the suburban equivalent of being knighted. Meanwhile, Valerie, she'd strutted into court expecting applause and walked out looking like she'd been hit by her own measuring tape. Her reputation wasn't just bruised, it was publicly shredded. And in a neighborhood where gossip spreads faster than crabgrass, that meant the tide was about to turn. Because here's the thing about bullies. Once their masks slip in public, everyone who's been quietly suffering suddenly finds their courage. Valerie didn't just lose in court, she lost her grip on the community. And speaking of the community,
Oh, did they come alive? For months, people whispered in private, too scared to speak. But after watching Valerie's courtroom performance crash and burn, the floodgates opened, which brings us to fact number 8, the neighborhood uprising.
You know how in every good story there's that one pivotal scene where the underdogs finally realize they don't have to take it anymore? That moment when years of silent suffering turn into a collective, nope, not today. That was Maple Ridge after Valerie's courtroom flop. For months, years even, neighbors had been too afraid to speak out. They'd whisper behind closed doors, double-check their lawns at dawn, and dread opening the mailbox because the only thing scarier than bills was another non-compliance notice signed with Valerie's flourish. But once word spread that she'd been caught red-handed in court, the fear started to crack. It didn't happen with fireworks or confetti. It started with small clusters. Couples who hadn't stood in their driveways for months suddenly lingered on corners, whispering with cautious excitement. "Did you hear? The judge threw it out." They had photos of her paying off an inspector. Wait, she lied under oath? Neighborhood gossip, but this time, instead of fueling Valerie's power, it was dismantling it. Ethan noticed it immediately. People who used to avoid eye contact now waved. Retired couples approached him with manila folders stuffed with their own violation letters, sheepishly admitting they'd been too embarrassed to show anyone before. "We thought maybe it was just us," they said. Turns out it wasn't just them. It was everyone. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and this wasn't your usual boring meeting about lawn fertilizer schedules. This was an uprising in khakis. Residents stood up one by one, voices shaking, not with fear, but with pent-up anger finally finding daylight. A single mom recounted how she'd been fined for improperly coiled hoses 3 weeks in a row. A retired teacher confessed she stopped gardening because she was terrified Valerie would snap photos of her yard neglect. A man admitted he checked his mailbox every day with a knot in his throat, convinced another notice was waiting. It was like watching dominoes fall. One story emboldened another, until the whole room was buzzing with revelations. And for the first time, people realized they weren't alone. Valerie had thrived on isolation, convincing each homeowner they were the problem, that they were the only one failing the sacred community standards. But now the curtain was pulled back. The wizard was exposed. And it turned out the so-called standards were just weapons in Valerie's personal arsenal. Then came the vote. Removal of the HOA president. 28 votes for, 1 against. Care to guess who the one was? Valerie herself, clutching her clipboard like a life preserver on the Titanic. There wasn't cheering. There wasn't gloating. The room didn't erupt in triumph. Instead, there was something heavier, something more profound. A long exhale. The sound of a neighborhood unclenching after years of tension. It was relief laced with exhaustion. The kind of silence that says, "We made it through, but wow, we should never have had to in the first place." Valerie, of course, tried to make one last stand. She launched into a dramatic speech about sacrifice and standards, painting herself as a martyr who carried the burden of keeping the neighborhood from collapsing into chaos. "I did what you were too weak to do," she declared, chin high, eyes blazing. But the magic was gone. Her audience had left the theater. When people stop buying your performance, the stage goes dark instantly. After the meeting, something incredible happened. Neighbors who had once hidden indoors started reclaiming their streets. Security camera footage was compared like baby photos, with people swapping stories instead of hiding them. They built connections out of shared scars. The paranoia that had isolated them for so long was replaced with solidarity. For the first time in years, Maple Ridge felt like an actual community instead of Valerie's personal kingdom. And Ethan, he wasn't just the guy who stood up to Valerie. He became the accidental rallying point, the one who cracked the spell by refusing to sell, by refusing to bow down, and by refusing to let Valerie's harassment turn into another motivated sale. He'd been the canary in the coal mine. And instead of suffocating, he sang until everyone realized the air had been poisoned all along. The neighborhood awakening wasn't flashy. It wasn't a Hollywood ending with confetti cannons and choreographed dances, but it was powerful in its own suburban way. Lights came back on in windows. Mailboxes stopped feeling like traps. Lawns started looking like yards again, not battlefields. And the community, scarred but stronger, decided they weren't going to let one power-drunk Karen dictate their lives ever again. But remember those cryptic texts? The anonymous ally lurking in the shadows, dropping just enough breadcrumbs to keep Ethan alive in this HOA war zone? Well, the mask was finally about to come off. Fact 9 reveals the identity of the mysterious ghost texter. And trust me, it's a twist straight out of a Netflix finale.
For weeks, Ethan's phone had been buzzing with anonymous texts, like he was stuck in some low-budget spy thriller. Don't trust Valerie. Document everything. She's done this before. Helpful? Yes. Creepy? Absolutely. And while those texts gave him a survival edge, they also gave him insomnia. Because let's be real, anonymous allies are the kind of thing that only feels comforting in movies. In real life, it makes you wonder if you're being stalked by Batman or targeted by a hacker with a god complex. But after the courtroom bombshell and Valerie's spectacular fall from grace, the mask finally came off. One evening, Ethan noticed a man lingering at the edge of the streetlight, hands in pockets, posture calm, not twitchy like a stalker, but intentional. He waited until the crowd of post-HOA meeting gossipers thinned out, then crossed the street with an easy gait. "Ethan?" he asked. "Name's Marcus. Marcus Hale." Now, Ethan was good with names, and this one hit like a memory tugging at his brain. Hale. Where had he seen that? And then it clicked. The old deed records, the obituary clippings, the dusty files he'd scoured at 2 a.m. Marcus was the nephew of Ruth Ellison, the woman who had owned Ethan's house for 45 years before passing away. Ruth, who had planted those towering maples in the yard with her husband back in the 80s. Ruth, whose nephew sold the house quickly, almost too quickly. Marcus didn't waste time. He admitted it flat out. "I'm the one who's been texting you." Now, if you were Ethan, this was either the best news or the creepiest news. On one hand, thank God it wasn't some random weirdo. On the other, this man had been quietly orchestrating your resistance like you were a pawn in his HOA chess match. Not exactly comforting. But Marcus's explanation turned suspicion into clarity. He had tried to stop Valerie when his aunt was alive, but he was too late. Ruth's final years had been overshadowed by Valerie's harassment, violation after violation, photo after photo of yard neglect, until the joy of gardening evaporated from her life. When Ruth passed, Marcus sold the house in a rush, desperate to escape Valerie's shadow. But the guilt never left him. And when he saw Ethan buy the house, he made a decision. If he couldn't protect his aunt, he'd make sure no one else suffered the same fate. That's why the texts were so precise. Marcus had been collecting evidence for months, years even. He had timelines of violations, spreadsheets of property transfers to the Redwood Preservation Trust, photos of Valerie cozying up to inspectors, affidavits from families who had sold under pressure. His messenger bag, when he finally opened it on Ethan's porch, looked like the smoking gun of a true crime investigation. Compared to Marcus's portfolio, Ethan's beloved binder looked like a kindergartner's scrapbook. And here's the wildest part. Marcus admitted he had used Ethan as bait, not cruelly, not maliciously, strategically. He knew Valerie couldn't resist. She had a pattern, a hunger, and Ethan's parcel was irresistible because it wasn't part of the HOA. It was the perfect trap. Marcus had given Ethan just enough breadcrumbs, document this, prepare for that, to survive long enough for Valerie to overplay her hand. And oh boy, did she overplay it. Now let's take a step back and appreciate the audacity. Marcus had essentially run a sting operation out of his grief. He'd been working quietly with journalists, investigators, even Ethan's lawyer before Ethan had any idea what was going on. He wasn't just exposing Valerie, he was dismantling the entire Redwood Trust pipeline. He wanted her arrogance to be her undoing, and Ethan had been the spark that set it all ablaze. Ethan's reaction? A mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You used me as bait," he said, not as an accusation, but as a truth that needed to hang in the air. Marcus didn't deny it. "I gave you warnings, I gave you tools, but you chose to stand your ground. Most people can't, not because they're weak, but because life is heavy and money is tight and systems are exhausting. I needed someone who could hold the line." That's when it all tied together. The cryptic texts, the ghostly guidance, the two specific warnings, they weren't random. They were the result of a man who had lost someone he loved to Valerie's cruelty and refused to let it happen again. Marcus wasn't just a neighbor. He was a survivor of Valerie's warpath, turned whistleblower, turned guardian angel with a grudge. And in that moment, Ethan realized something important. This fight was never just about his house. It was about every family Valerie had bullied, every home sold under duress, every night someone lay awake wondering if they were crazy. He wasn't just protecting his driveway, he was part of something bigger, a reckoning. But the story doesn't end with unmasking the ghost texter, because once Valerie's scheme collapsed, the fallout spread like wildfire, from City Hall to local news to the very foundation of what HOAs were supposed to stand for. Which brings us to fact number 10, the aftermath, the justice, and the lessons this neighborhood learned the hard way. When the dust finally settled, Maple Ridge looked less like a battleground and more like a neighborhood waking up from a long, collective nightmare. Valerie's fall wasn't just a personal loss. It was a collapse of an entire system she had built on fear, fines, and fraudulent standards. And the ripple effects went far beyond Ethan's porch light. Let's start with the obvious. Valerie was out. Her removal as HOA president, 28 votes to 1, was the kind of community mic drop that doesn't need applause. It was quiet, powerful, and permanent. The one dissenting vote? Valerie herself, of course, clutching her clipboard like it was a life raft. But the neighborhood wasn't buying what she was selling anymore. Her power, once absolute, vanished overnight. She went from queen bee to social pariah, from clipboard tyrant to that woman we don't talk to at block parties. Then came the official fallout. Remember those coffee shop photos of Valerie handing envelopes to a code inspector? Yeah, those didn't just disappear into the courtroom ether. The district attorney picked them up like they were season tickets to the corruption Super Bowl. Inspectors were suspended, reassigned, and suddenly City Hall became very interested in transparency. A new online system was set up for violations, one that anyone could view without a password. Sunshine has a funny way of making cockroaches scatter, and Valerie's cozy little pipeline was exposed for what it was, a racket. Meanwhile, the Redwood Preservation Trust, the shadowy buyer scooping up underpriced homes, found itself under a microscope. Reporters swarmed. Headlines screamed about alleged code enforcement corruption in Willow Creek. What had once been brushed off as just HOA drama was suddenly front-page news. And the narrative shifted from annoying neighborhood disputes to predatory schemes preying on vulnerable homeowners. Exactly the kind of bad PR a squeaky clean-sounding trust didn't want. Even Valerie's own household wasn't immune. Her husband, Greg, a mild-mannered accountant, took the stand and admitted he'd signed trust documents thinking he was diversifying their retirement portfolio, not realizing he was essentially underwriting a suburban shakedown. Watching him testify was painful, a man realizing in real time that the empire his wife had built was rotten to the core and that he'd been complicit without even knowing it. Predators don't just hurt strangers, they hollow out their own homes. For Ethan and Lena, the healing came in increments. First, a full night's sleep, then coffee on the porch without scanning the street for Valerie with a tape measure, then walking the dog without bracing for ambush complaints. Slowly, their bodies unclenched. You don't realize how tightly you've been wound until the tension finally releases and your shoulders drop an inch. For the first time since closing day, their house felt like a home. And the neighborhood? It transformed. Where fear once kept people isolated, solidarity bloomed. Residents set up watching the watcher systems, teaching each other how to appeal bogus notices, who to CC on letters so complaints didn't vanish, and which buzzwords were red flags in HOA language. Neighbors compared files, swapped stories, and most importantly, stopped feeling ashamed. The private dread that had kept them silent turned into a collective voice demanding accountability. The lessons ran deep. People realized that community standards mean nothing if they're only used as weapons, that order isn't the same as ownership, that an HOA is supposed to protect, not prey. And perhaps most importantly, they learned that sometimes the most rebellious sentence you can say is simply, "That doesn't apply to me." Especially when you can back it up with a map and a neon highlighter. And here's the kicker. The ripple effect spread beyond Maple Ridge. Other neighborhoods, hearing the story, started pushing back. Families who had been ready to sell out of fear changed their minds. One day, Ethan received a postcard from Laurel Bend, signed by 3 families. No return address, just 3 names in a single line. "We saw your story, and we're not selling." Lena pressed it to their fridge with a little red bird magnet. It was proof that their messy, exhausting fight had inspired others to resist. Ethan sometimes wondered if he felt guilty about Marcus using him as bait. Some days he framed it as noble, that he had helped break a cycle. Other days he admitted to himself he wished someone else had bought the house first. Most days, though, he thought of Janet, the woman who had sold during her husband's chemo, hand shaking around her mug, and Ruth Ellison, who had stopped gardening out of fear of Valerie's photos. He landed somewhere in the middle, grateful he could do what others shouldn't have to, angry that it ever was necessary. The ultimate irony? Ethan didn't hate HOAs. He understood their purpose. But he despised when HOAs became costumes for meanness, when people wore community standards like armor to disguise personal vendettas. Because that's what Valerie had done, turned rules into weapons, order into tyranny, and neighbors into victims. So, the final lesson? Sometimes the loudest person on the block isn't the voice of authority. They're just the one who learned how to make a clipboard sound like a badge. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep your receipts, appeal again, and show up until the bully finally loses her stage. So here's the question I'll throw to you. If you pulled into your brand new driveway and someone screamed, "You can't live here!" would you pack up and leave to keep the peace, or would you dig in and fight, knowing it might get messy before it gets better? Drop your stories in the comments. I want to hear you where you draw the line between standards and tyranny. And hey, if you enjoyed watching this HOA Karen get dethroned, smash that like button, subscribe for more real-life HOA war stories, and remember, sometimes the quietest rebellion is saying, "That doesn't apply to me," and backing it up with a map.